notice Goliath-sized challenges often feel hopeless because overcoming them seems impossible? Self-reliance will never defeat giants. God-reliance, on the other hand, makes the seemingly impossible possible. On this season of the Challenges Won't Stop Me podcast, gain insights and inspiration as guests share how God equipped and empowered them to overcome their giant-sized challenges with powerful God-reliant strategies, habits, mindsets, and fight verses. With God fighting for you, you too can overcome Goliath-sized challenges. Host Melony Brown is eager to get started. So let's go!
Thank you for joining me for today's video solo cast. Been doing these for a couple of seasons. I really look forward to them because I get to share what I've been learning. And I get to share it with you in the hopes that it will help you as you face challenges. If you are listening to this episode on your favorite podcast app, I really encourage you to head over to my YouTube channel at Melony Brown, because I don't want you to miss any of the visual images or God's beautiful creation. Good spiritual posture may be something that you've never thought about. Well, I hadn't until God rudely intersected my path with this challenge. Hey, Mel, I really want you to learn something about posture. Yes, we know about posture that we read in magazines and on social media. But this is a little bit different. This is good spiritual posture. And God's been teaching me about that over the last few years. I did a few episodes in season 7. Just want to mention them because it will help tie all of this together. In season 7, episode 117, I talked about the spiritual posture of standing firm. And I used as a visual representation hiking boots, because the idea is that we stand firm on God's foundation when we're going through challenges. Then secondly, episode 127 was about leaning on God. And the visual symbol for that was a hiking pole. Because when you are hiking, if you've ever used one, you know how valuable it is. The terrain is rough and you feel like you might fall or trip. This helps you to stay strong during those times. And then at the end of season 7, I did an episode, 133, and it was about holding on to expectant hope. The visual symbol is a coffee mug. And the hope that God gives us is not just to hear. It's not even to hear. God gives us a hope that is overflowing. Today's episode is about flexing God's faithfulness. Now, when you hear the word flex, what do you think of? Flexing muscles, right? Yeah, I do too. Think about a bodybuilder. A bodybuilder stands in front of those mirrors at the gym. Or he's standing on a stage in a competition. Same thing. What is it that he's trying to convey? I am strong. Admire my strength, right? I'm not going there with this episode at all. In fact, one of my favorite Bible teachers is Christy McClellan. If you don't know her studies, I highly recommend them. In her study, The Gospel on the Ground, it's about the book of Acts. But she makes this statement. We often think of Jesus coming to do an upside down kingdom, turn things upside down because it's a mess. She said, I don't really think that's what he meant. She said, I believe he comes to turn things right side up. Now that perspective, I like a lot. That's what I want to do in this episode, is to talk about flexing, not in the admire me, look at my strength kind of way, I want to look at it as flexing God's faithfulness, flexing what he's done, who he is, the fact that he is a promise maker and a promise keeper, that his character is trustworthy. That's where we're going today. Now, you may be asking, what is the visual symbol? I'll tell you, but just not yet. You're going to have to wait a bit. Moses, when he was talking to all the Israelites, they're standing before him. They can see the promised land. He's turning over the reins to Joshua. He didn't like having to do that. He wanted to be in the promised land, but God said, nope, Joshua's my man. So he's this long speech in Deuteronomy. We learn a lot about God during this time because Moses goes through in those chapters telling and reminding the Israelites of how God was faithful. Yes, they needed reminding just like we do. We need reminding of God's faithfulness. Something happens, we see God's faithfulness, we see his hand, and a year later, it's fuzzy. So Moses knew that as they were going in to the promised land, they needed to be reminded, God was faithful. He took care of us in numerous ways. But then he gets to chapter 7, verse 9, and he identifies God using a name of God that describes God as faithful. So let's look at this verse. Moses said, "Know therefore, the Lord your God is God. He is the faithful God, keeping his covenant of love to 1,000 generations of those who love him and keep his commandments." The Hebrew word for the faithful God is Emunah, and it means he is faithful. His covenant can be trusted. He can be relied upon. Now, if we then go and look at the word faithful in isolation, we learn that it's the word amah. Initially may sound, I'm not familiar with that, but yes, you are. It's actually the word amen, and we say it at the end of our prayers. We have learned that amen means so be it, and it does. It's also meaning at the end of our prayers, we say, God, you are faithful. Your promises are true. Now that is a powerful way to end a prayer. I want to look at a couple of verses that specifically say God is faithful. These are ones that I would love for you to write down somewhere, and you can go back and look at them on the days when you're questioning, is he going to come through? Can I trust him? Oh yes, you can. The first one, 1 Thessalonians 5:24 reads, "The one who calls you is faithful, and he will do it." God is faithful. Hebrews 10, verse 23 reads, "Let us hold unswervingly to the hope we profess, for he who promised is faithful." He was faithful to the Israelites. He was faithful to Elijah. He was faithful to all of these people in the Bible, the New Testament, Paul. That's a very large reason why we have the Bible, is a record of God's faithfulness. But he wasn't just faithful to them. He's faithful to you. He's faithful to me. Those promises were not just meant for them. His character wasn't just who he was then. It's who he is now. And that is a promise that you can trust and rely on. I want us to look at one character from the Bible who, when he was facing a challenge, he flexed God's faithfulness. You know this story as a boy, a slingshot, and Goliath. Oh, does how David flex God's faithfulness. It's amazing. And I've read this story, you've probably read this story numerous times, but by looking at the spiritual posture, different aspects of it just popped out that I thought, how have I not noticed that before? Goliath was not a small challenge. Goliath wasn't a medium-sized challenge. Goliath was a giant-sized challenge. And those are going to come. But in each of those challenges, we need to remember to flex God's faithfulness. Because that's what needs to meet that challenge. We're going to jump in where David is on the battlefield with Saul's men, Saul's army. He's not there because he's going to be fighting. He's just a little guy. He's been out in the fields minding the sheep, as his brothers are so happy to tell him. He's not there to fight. He's there because his dad said, go take some food to your brothers who are fighting. After 40 days of Saul's men hearing Goliath just taunt them and defy God and his kingdom and his authority, they're terrified. And David's looking at them and he's thinking, these are warriors. Why are they acting like this? So he says something to them that's very powerful. In verse 26 of 1 Samuel, David says, who is this uncircumcised Philistine that should defy the armies of God? Hey, are you listening to this guy? Why are you allowing him to defy God? King Saul hears about what David is doing. King Saul brings David to his throne and says, hey, what's going on? I want to hear what you have to say. So David says, I'll go fight the giant. Scholars say that Goliath was 9 feet 9 inches tall. We don't know how old David was at this point. We don't know how tall he was. But he was a young man. David flexes God's faithfulness before he leaves Saul. Now, why does he need to tell Saul anything? Because Saul is a challenge. Saul is not believing David can handle Goliath. I mean, look, all of Saul's army is petrified of Goliath. So why should this little shepherd boy be able to come in and deal with Goliath? So even though Goliath is the big challenge, the huge giant-sized challenge, there's a little one, or maybe a medium-sized one, before he even gets there. And that challenge is King Saul and convincing him. So how does David convince King Saul? He flexes God's faithfulness in verses 34 through 37, which reads, but David said to Saul, your servant has been keeping his father's sheep. When a lion or bear came and carried off a sheep from the flock, I went after it, struck it, and rescued the sheep from its mouth. When it turned on me, I seized it by its hair, struck it, and killed it. Your servant has killed both the lion and the bear. This uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, because he has defied the armies of the living God. The Lord who rescued me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will rescue me from the hand of this Philistine. That is a powerful flex of God's faithfulness. Did you notice that he talked about delivering him from those wild animals? Those animals that he killed could have ripped him limb from limb. David knows that. But what he knows also is that his God, the faithful God, Emunah, is so much bigger than any giant. And that the promises that God made, that David learned, he didn't just read them when he was studying Torah or the first 5 books of the Old Testament. He experienced them. his brothers thought, oh, he's just a little shepherd boy out in the field tending sheep. Not a big job. But God used that time that David was out in the fields tending sheep to show him, to let him experience his faithfulness. That the promises that God had made, David experienced. So now when he goes to stand in front of King Saul, he can confidently and boldly say, what God did out in those fields to help me kill those animals, and he rescued me from them tearing me from limb to limb, he'll do with Goliath. I trust him. Saul says, okay, go. The Lord be with you. And just as a side note, the Lord be with you is all throughout the 5 books of the Torah as well. So when David heard that, it was music to his ears. We learn about that name of God when Jesus is born, because Emmanuel means God is with us. Saul's looking at him going, okay, if you're going to do that, go, the Lord be with you, but let me give you my armor. David looks at him and says, this doesn't fit me. I can't wear this. And here's why. In Ephesians 6, it talks about the different pieces of armor. It talks about the breastplate of righteousness, the belt of truth, the shoes of peace, and so on. While those are pieces of armor, think about it this way. Each of us as believers can access the armor that Paul talks about. But my experience of God's righteousness is going to be different from yours. My experience of God's peace is going to be different than yours. While we all are given that suit of armor, it's going to fit differently, even if we're the exact same size. And the beauty of it is that David knew, Saul, I can't wear your armor. It doesn't fit. It's not going to work. Now we get to the part that we're most familiar with. 1 Samuel 17, verse 40. Then he took his staff in his hand. He chose 5 stones out of the stream, and he put them in his shepherd's pouch. And then he took his slingshot, and he approached Goliath. David is filled up with what he knows about God as a faithful God. He remembers the times that God delivered him, the times that God filled him with peace, the times that God provided for him. All of those things are going through David's head, and he marches out to that Philistine with 5 stones. Now, why 5? You might have never thought about it. I hadn't until God said, hey, do you know why I picked 5? No, God, I don't. So I looked it up. 5 is a significant number to God. It is about his sufficiency. Think about the first 5 books of the Old Testament or the Torah. Think about the 5 types of sacrifice. Think about 5 loaves and 2 fish. 5. Even there were 10 bridesmaids. How many showed up that were prepared? 5. So 5 stones talks about God's sufficiency. It's saying that God provides when we as humans are limited or unprepared. That speaks loudly. The visual symbol for flexing God's faithfulness is a stone. This is a flat stone, and I wrote the faithful God on one side and Emunah on the other side. Let this stone be a visual reminder of God's faithfulness, and that you can flex God's faithfulness no matter what kind of challenge you're facing. We know how the story ends. David knew that God was sufficient for him to face Goliath. God is faithful. God is Emunah. David is standing in front of Goliath. Little David standing in front of 9-foot tall Goliath with his stones. And Goliath, of course, is mocking him, and he is mocking God. I'm sure you've been there. When you're in the middle of a challenge, the enemy is just in your head, just giving you fits about, you can't do this. You're never going to make it out of this. I don't know who you think you are. That's why you flex God's faithfulness. Because it's not about you. It's not about your strength. It's about God. And that you know He has been and will be faithful in whatever challenge that you're going through. A few verses before, David stood in front of King Saul and flexed God's faithfulness. It was convincing enough that Saul said, okay, go. Now David is standing in front of Goliath, who is mocking him, and now David flexes God's faithfulness to Goliath. And this is what he says in verses 45 through 47. David said to the Philistine, "You come against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hands, and I'll strike you down and cut off your head. This very day I will give you the carcasses of the Philistine army to the birds and the wild animals, and the whole world will know that there is a God in Israel. All those gathered here will know that it is not by sword or spear that the Lord saves. For the battle is the Lord's, and He will give all of you into our hands." Go, David. He is flexing God's faithfulness time and time and time again. Let's look at it for just a moment. David says, the Lord Almighty. That is the Lord for whom nothing is impossible. Now, wait a minute. Little boy David, standing in front of giant Goliath, seems pretty impossible as we're looking at it. But not in God's economy. Not in the right side up perspective. God can do the impossible, and David knows it. Then we look at the host of the angel armies. God doesn't just send one angel when we need help. He sends an entire army, and who is at the head of that army? God is. David knows this. David has experienced this. That's why he can flex God's faithfulness. The Lord will deliver. Oh, he's already mentioned this characteristic of God to King Saul, but now he's saying it to Goliath. And why is he saying it to Goliath? Because deliver and rescue are much the same word in the Greek and in the Hebrew. And David knows from experience that God will deliver. And in this case, he's saying to the Philistine, God's going to deliver me, rescue me, and you're going to be the one who has a carcass. Not me. It's you and your army. Pretty boastful, but he's not boasting in himself. He's boasting in God's faithfulness. He's boasting in Emunah. That is a boast that we as believers can do today when you're facing a Goliath-sized challenge, struggle, the grief, all the things. They're huge, and they're taking over everything in your life, your mind, your finances, whatever. you can flex God's faithfulness because God is faithful. Now, another thing that David says is, this battle is not mine. It's not the Israelite army. It's God's battle. And time again, God defeated Israel's enemies because the battle is not their battle. It's God's battle. And He is always victorious. I love how in those few short verses, David flexes God's faithfulness over and over and over. And it's not because he heard about it. He learned about it in real life. He learned about it through his own experiences. That's why he can flex God's faithfulness. So now we're reaching the point where the battle is about to begin. In verses 48 through 50 of 1 Samuel, it reads, "As the Philistine moved closer to attack David, David ran quickly toward the battle line to meet him. Reaching into his bag and taking out a stone, he slung it and struck the Philistine on the forehead. The stone sank into his forehead and he fell face down into the ground." David ran to Goliath. He didn't run away. He ran to Goliath because God is faithful, and he knew that God would show up. We have been given faith. I want to share a little bit about this Greek word for faith. It's pistis. It's not just this casual, yes, I believe in God. No, it is a deep conviction that you trust Him, that you trust His promises, that you trust His character, that you trust the God who is faithful, Emunah. It is a conviction, a deep conviction that you trust and rely on God because He has proven Himself faithful. So you can trust in Him, that you have confidence in Him, that when He makes a promise, it wasn't just for the men and women in the Bible, but it's for your faith walk as well. Interestingly, faith isn't something we produce. You can't just say, I'm going to have more faith. Faith is a gift from God. It's actually this birthing that He does in us each time that He wants to demonstrate and teach us about His character, about His promises. As we experience those, it grows or strengthens our faith. While we want to have stronger faith, most times we grow our faith through challenges. In 2010, I did something a little unexpected. Those around me were like, Mel, what do you mean? You want to get a tattoo? And I did. I wanted to get a tattoo that reminded me of God's faithfulness. I faced some challenges when I was very young, and up to that point, I had faced a few more. Little did I know that it would be quite a few more, but I decided to put this tattoo on my left bicep because this is the weakest part of me, because this is the area that the stroke that I had at age 2 attacked most and has continued to be weak despite numerous hours in the gym trying to pump iron. Now, I didn't go flex in front of the mirror, just in case you were wondering. But I did it because I wanted that reminder of God's faithfulness, because it says to me, God's grace is sufficient. It's proven in my weakness, which is from 2 Corinthians. That verse, I get it. This weakness, these challenges that I've gone through, highlight God's strength because I wouldn't be what I am as far as health-wise, spiritual-wise, emotional-wise, any of that, if it weren't for God's strength and Him growing my faith each and every time. I'll be honest, there are days when I'm struggling. I'm just weary. And I will stand in front of my mirror and I will look at this tattoo and I will say out loud, God was faithful in this way. Mel, remember when? You don't need a tattoo to do that. But it's helpful for me, and it's a reminder of God's faithfulness, that He is Emunah. We're going to end today with a fight verse. Psalm 145, verse 13. It reads, "The Lord is trustworthy in all He promises and faithful in all He does." Thanks, friend, for joining me. Your spiritual posture is hugely important every single day of your faith walk, but it is crucial when you are going through a challenge. Remember your stone. God is faithful, Emunah. Until next time.